Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we've watched Pedro Almodóvar's recent short film, The Human Voice. This came out in 2020 and I believe it was made under lockdown conditions.
Yeah, in the middle of lockdown. I mean, it was delayed because of lockdown, but still, I think production began in July last year.
So it's based on Jean Cocteau's one-person monodrama, I think the word is.
Yeah, it's a monologue, yeah.
From 1930, which has been adapted and has inspired many different films and other works.
Let me say a little bit about that, actually, because it's almost like a showcase for all the great female stars of the period. So there's been a version with Simone Signoret, with Sophia Loren. Anna Magnani did a film of it with Rossellini that was written by Fellini, I think. One of the segments of a film. Ingrid Bergman did it for American television. Yeah, so it's got a huge lineage. It's almost where like the great actress divas of the day kind of prove their mettle.
And I believe it was written as a kind of way to shut up his actresses who were complaining that his characters weren't rich enough for them. He wasn't giving them enough to do.
No.
So he said, well, here's the end, fuck you, here's a challenge, you know. And in this, it's Tilda Swinton, and it's Pedro Almodóvar's first English language film. And I was just asking you, does he speak English? Because it's dialogue heavy.
I think he speaks English, and he speaks English, I would say fluently, though with a very heavy Spanish accent. Though, I think one of the great things about Almodóvar that is not appreciated outside of Spain is what an ear he's got. Yeah, so often, you know, watching characters in his films is like hearing my aunts talk. Yeah, you know, because he is from a kind of working class rural background, you know, and so the expressions and there is a kind of, you know, the way that language is used and a kind of a subtlety of the use of language. You know, the subtitles don't give you that. And actually, I think for me, this is one of the things that is lacking in this film. Yeah,
the poetry in the language.
Well, the way that Tilda Swinton speaks that language, and in fact, that language itself, I kind of felt, you know, that maybe it's just my prejudice, but I think had he done it in Spanish, there would have been different layers.
Sure. So I suppose we should say briefly what it's about, which is about this woman who, in this case, is played by Tilda Swinton, who is waiting in her house or apartment or wherever it may be set for her lover to come home. And she says at the start, it's been 3 days, and it's always been 3 days, but you always came home, and this time you haven't. And then a phone call to him ensues, and you just hear the one side of it. He's an invisible participant, invisible and inaudible.
Yes.
On the other end, it's a monologue.
So her husband, her lover has left her, and so she's just waiting for him to pick up.
She's packed his things and pick up the dog as well.
Yeah, and he doesn't arrive. And actually, this is a work that has been in Almodóvar's mind, or at least since 1986-87, because the play is performed in Almodóvar's Law of Desire, including the scene where Carmen Maura takes the axe, and of course it's the basis for Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, and there are echoes of it in this film. The scenes in the balcony, the watering the plants in the balcony, the setting fire, all of those things happen in Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. And then it was retaken again in the film that he did with Penelope Cruz.
Volver?
No, not Volver. Wait a second. Broken Embraces.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so in Broken Embraces, he's got a film within a film, that is also based on Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, that's given the original title for the film, or the original concept, which was suitcases and stewardesses, and so
the film within the film is based on Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, or The Human Voice.
Well, both.
Right, because that is based on the human voice.
That's right. Yeah,
sure.
So all of this by way of saying that this is material that has been on his noodle, for like 40 years, really.
Yeah. and this is a straight-up adaptation of it.
That's
Although not as long as...
a free adaptation.
Yes, that's right. It does say in the credits as well, freely based on Jean Cocteau's play. And you can see why, right? It's given him... You get the ability to play, once you have this central conceit, you can manipulate this in all sorts of ways that you like. I really get the feeling this is. I mean, I'm not someone who's very well versed in Almodóvar, not nearly as much as you are. But I really get a strong feeling that this is Almodóvar deconstructing himself, looking at his own tropes and his own characters, and the thing that his own themes: love, women on the verge of a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
So the place that Tilda Swinton lives looks like any of his houses or flats that you've seen before. It's kind of very brightly coloured,
with an older palette, with a more complex and subtle palette, right? So the greens this time are olive green. Yeah, he's working kind of with patterns on the olive green. Yeah, the kitchen has red accents rather than being like orange or the way that it would have been in the past, right? So it's kind of it's still bright,
but it's still very boldly coloured.
Yeah, but in a darker, more subtle, more complex kind of arrangement. Really.
Sure. But what you quickly realise, I don't even think it's much of a reveal, I think it's quite clear at the start, this is a set inside a warehouse, and the walls are drywall, these are plywood.
I think that's so clever, because, so there are different ways of opening up a stage play, and particularly like a monologue, right? Theatrical monologue. So there is a scene where she goes to a hardware store to buy an axe, right? But mostly it's kind of done through the opposite of what you expect. So rather than filmic in quotation marks, or opening up the space that a theater would provide, he does the opposite. He kind of shows you that it's all being filmed in a set. So actually the theatricality of the film is part of the way that it makes it like so cinematic.
Yeah, and the camera's used to emphasise it. So it's not just that you see the exterior of this set and that you see that it's in a warehouse, but the camera will fly across the top of the set, so you see where the walls end and that you're just looking in at this plan view from above and things like that. It never really lets you forget that this is what you're looking at. And at the end, when the film reaches its conclusion, she burns it down, which she burns it down and she leaves with the dog on a new adventure. She says to the dog, "You're my dog now, we're going off on this day, we'll mourn him together." But it really plays, to me at least, as not a disavowal, but a kind of a saying goodbye to those aesthetics and tropes that Almodóvar has used for years and years and years, and the embrace of something new.
I'm not sure if it's saying goodbye to those tropes. It's saying
I'm not saying like he'd never do it again, but it does have a sense of that.
Well, I'm saying goodbye to that, because the whole thing is about an intensely lived love affair that has just broken up. Mm-hmm. So that ending is going away from that dream world, from that fantasy, and entering the real world, and so the love affair has been a movie in a way. So and it's actually kind of very poetically kind of depicted. It's kind of the move away from that set, the burning down of that world, which has been an imaginary world, a fantasy world, but a world that she's intensely felt, and been very real to her, but then kind of walking off with the dog into the streets of Madrid. Yeah. So sometimes, you're made to think that you are actually in this bedroom or in this living room, and at other times it's made clear that it's the set of a living room and so on, right? It progresses. Well, it doesn't quite progress, actually, because you are shown, the first image you see of her is her in this amazing red ball gown, right, against a warehouse wall. So the film plays with all that, but there's still the dialogue, right? There's still, though the monologue begins a few minutes into the film itself, and she lies, she's lying to her boyfriend, right, or to her lover, saying, "I'm fine, I went to this restaurant, I went to the theater, I've been seeing my therapist," and then you realize that actually that she's not telling you that she hasn't been telling the truth, right? That she's been a mess, kind of, throughout. So actually, you get the sense that, and it's a very interesting thing because, I suspect, though I actually haven't read the play, but I suspect that it ends with a suicide. Yeah, that kind of the whole world crumbles and so on. Whereas actually this one is very much, she sets fire to the house, which is one ending, but then, and you think she's in it, right? And she tells the lover, what you see is me burning or something. But actually, no, that's it's the burning of an episode in her life and a move on to the next one. So it's a kind of a little bit of a triumphant.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Do you think you're meant to think that she's in it for a split second? Because I didn't. I thought it was clear she was stood outside setting fire to it.
I wasn't clear until the film made it clear.
Sure.
Yeah, but there was a moment when she says, she's on the phone, she says, "You see that smoke, it's me burning," that I thought, well, it could be.
Oh, right. No,
and then then you get another shot and you see that she's outside the fire. Yeah.
Right. No, to be fair, I thought it was clear from that point, and it struck me as just poetic, sort of straight-facedly poetic, that she was saying, "It's me burning," and I'm on fire here. It felt a lot shorter than when it came to the end, and I thought, oh, there'll be another section where she leaves and you see her take on whatever it might be. But no, that was the end. It actually felt, even for a film that's half an hour long, really short and very quick. And I thought my tolerance for this was going to be really low when it began.
I thought your tolerance for it was going to be really low. So what way was not?
It was initially. Initially I thought, oh, this is pretty indulgent. This isn't really my kind of thing. It's not. I don't. There have been monologue sort of things and things like this that I've enjoyed. I just thought this isn't going to be one of them. But it grew on me very quickly.
It's so beautiful.
It really made me think about lockdown as well, because her isolation in that house is so vivid, especially because the dog is constantly looking for the lover who's not there and is not really that interested.
Sniffing at the suitcases.
Yeah, and then the way that his suit is laid out on the bed is like the Invisible Man, this image of a man who isn't there.
Yes, you do get an acute sense of loneliness. You also get an acute sense of the living space, which has been important in lockdown. So it's not just a trope with Almodóvar that he pays great attention to spaces and the way that they're decorated and the way that they look, right? But I think it was also a characteristic of lockdown. Yeah, we were in our apartments or in our houses, and that was the extent of our world. So let me pick up on a couple of things, because the film is so absolutely archetypal Almodóvar, right? From the extraordinary credit sequence, which is by Juan Gatti, and then the images, which are by José Luis Alcaine, who has been Almodóvar's regular cinematographer for the last 20-25 years or so. And the images are so extraordinary. That red dress against that backdrop, and everything counts. You see all of his obsessions, right? So the paintings. Actually, there's a credit to the paintings. So you have Vargas, Man Ray photographs, a Gentileschi painting, a Vargas drawing of a half-naked woman. So all of these things are all he's obsessed with art and beauty. The ceramic pots in the bookshelves, and and everything means. So you are shown Tilda Swinton arranging her coffee table, and what do you see on the coffee table? You see Almodóvar's obsessions. Breakfast at Tiffany's, two Cirque films, Written on the Wind and All That Heaven Allows, the Jackie, Kill Bill, The Phantom Thread, but also Tender is the Night, the Fitzgerald and the Monroe stories. These are things he goes back to over and over and over again. And I think he also references a little bit, at least, these previous monologues, because on the bookshelf you see an autobiography of Ingrid Bergman and so on. So it's not a cluttered house, but it's a house that is, decorated with objects and paintings that each mean something or each fulfill a role, in the narrative. And you see in it also a kind of an obsession with art and beauty, in life, really, as a way of making sense of life.
Can you suggest what some of those significances are? Because this was at the point this is early on when she's arranging that coffee table and putting everything away, and you're meant to notice all of those titles.
Yes.
And this was at the point where I was thinking, oh, this will not be my cup of tea, because just listing, works that you admire or like, whatever it might be, putting them in is not. I would never think that's enough. Really.
Well, but for me, it's all very significant, really, because you begin to detect a sensibility, right? So, kind of he often references Truman Capote in his works, right? So, the reference to Breakfast at Tiffany is not a reference to the movie; it's a reference to the Capote
to his own interesting
novella, yeah. Which I think I remember in All About My Mother, he quotes Capote directly, saying something like, "You're called to be a writer, to self-flagellate," or something like that. So these are kind of recurring obsessions. The Monroe short story is the same. Written in the Wind, I mean, his whole directorial style, I think, is based on Cirque, just the way he moves the camera and actually how he uses mise-en-scène. It's a very Circean kind of mise-en-scène throughout his career. So to me, those things are not accidental, and they're not just
I certainly don't think they're accidental, but they do feel thin. It does tend to me to feel thin when someone will just name check.
Well, but I don't see it as name checking. And in fact, it's about 10 seconds of the film, right?
Yeah, it's not a long period. But nonetheless, this was at the point where I was thinking, this was something that was making me think, oh, right, it's this kind of thing. And I was glad when I found more slides onto. In fact, I did think the same thing about Tilda Swinton early on. I thought, oh, this is going to be her being grouchy or upset or angry in a number of different rooms. And one could very uncharitably say that that's exactly what it is. But it's much more than that. And actually, she's really emotionally fluid in the way she moves from one thing to another. And I was thinking at one point, this must be, God knows how long it took to shoot, right? It might have been like a week-long shoot or 2 weeks or a month, who knows. But they wouldn't have done it in a day. And to be emotionally fluid and keep a through line from one shot to the next, over the course of shooting over several days with breaks and all the rest of it, that's got to be really, really hard, actually.
You see, for me, I initially thought she wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
Because I have seen Anna Magnani in it, and it's like an opera, right? Like, the emotion is so raw and fluid, and and you're in her mind, really, and you feel everything that she's feeling, and I thought, that Tilda Swinton looks beautiful, yeah, but that she was too reserved, and she's the opposite of Magnani. She's not an open actress. She's a very closed off actress. Yeah, I think, who then does really surprising things. Yeah, she goes, to very daring places, but it starts off with being closed. I've also seen the Bergman one, and it's like kind of very typically such a masochistic performance. She loves to suffer, Ingrid Bergman. So I thought that Tilda Swinton wasn't,
Did you think that throughout?
Well, I thought that until the end.
Right.
And then at the end, when she walks off into the streets of Madrid, you then get a sense, because, this character has a lot more resourcefulness, than an Anna Magnani, who really will die of love. You never get the feeling that, or Carmen Maura in Women of the Verge Nervous Breakdown, which also then has a happy ending. But throughout, she's suffering in such a raw, and funny form, And this lacked both the humor and the rawness, Yeah,
I agree. It doesn't have either of those very much. But I do think, I felt that resourcefulness and sense of resilience early on, in fact, when she's buying the axe. Even though you don't know what it's for. I wasn't familiar with the play, so I didn't know what it would turn out to be. But just the image of her buying an axe, for one thing, and the dress, not the dress, but the costume that she's in, and that she doesn't really seem to fit in this place at all. Not only the fact she's English and she's speaking Spanish in a Spanish store, but that she's, upper class, dressed very beautifully, doesn't seem to fit in this place. And so, and you can see it in the store clerk's face as well. As she walks off, he's looking at her like this isn't the normal person who comes in.
That, by the way,
what's she doing buying this axe?
Is Almodóvar's brother.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, who does it's like a Hitchcock thing. His brother appears in
Right.
all of his films in tiny roles. Yeah, sometimes just walking down the street, but it's kind of like a thing that they do. And this one, in fact, has not only the brother but the nephews. So the two younger men, that are on the side while she's buying the axe.
That's it.
You can tell instantly by the faces. And then I noticed in the credits that it was indeed the case.
But then she gets home, and when she decides she's going to attack this suit, she gets the axe out and she takes the protective cover off it. The shot it's a tracking shot, low down, you just see her feet in these heels, and the axe not quite dragging on the floor but being held down. And the clack of the heels on the floor, and the feeling that she's going to do something mad, like that, it grabbed me at that point.
Well, that is a scene in Women on the Verge or its Breakdown, the heels.
Is it like a direct lift from his own work?
Yes, and there's the scene with the axe is in Law of Desire. But when you see Carmen Maura with the axe, it's like you're seeing a fury, like a forced out of control, like raw pain unleashed, right? You never feel that with Tilda Swinton. And in fact, there's a moment, because when you have a close up of her heels clicking on the flat, and you realize they're leopard skin heels, yeah. And actually, there's very little leopard about Tilda Swinton.
I like that. I like that. See, what I like about Tilda Swinton's performance, and maybe it's something that is part of her persona more generally, is that sense of reservation, and that when she goes mad, like she's going to go mad with the axe, she attacks that suit with an axe, and it doesn't hurt the suit. She's attacking it on a bed. It's not cutting anything. She's just letting loose. And it's the idea that, like, she's letting loose unprofessionally. Like, she doesn't know how to let loose because, like, she never has before. And the feeling like she's been driven to do something she doesn't know how to do properly. But it's like that's a state that she's been driven to. That's what I like about her. Whereas with another actress whose performance might show much more kind of superficial, as in on the surface, emotional fragility and rawness, it would feel less of a shock that she does that, actually. Tilda Swinton, you're like, oh, well, what's driven this woman to do this? Because she can't even do it properly. She's never done it before.
Well, as I said, I ended up appreciating her at the end. Yeah, because it's a very different kind of performance in the role than you're used to. It is much more reserved, much more in control. Even when she's being out of control, you sense a sense of reserve, which is very atypical for the role. And I thought while watching it wrong. Yeah, and then actually, that moment where she's staring at the flames, and then you see her outside, and then she walks out. It kind of made me rethink the performance. Yeah, kind of put it in a different place, and I think I ended up really appreciating it as well.
I think that's something that she moves to. So like that madness when she's attacking the suit is as unhinged as she can be. And by the time she's burning down the set and the flat and the apartment, whatever, she has regained control by that point. That's so she loses control when she tears up the suit, or tries to. And by the end, she has made a decision to burn down that flat. She does it very deliberately. She's on the phone. She's talking her lover through it. And she leaves very deliberately. It's a growth of the character.
All right. Well, I loved it, and I'm definitely going to see it again. So what is your final verdict?
I'm probably not going to see it again. But, there's all things in moderation. It was still good.
Right. It's great.
It is. It's very good. And I was really surprised at how much I got into it. And I was really surprised at how short it felt for a film that I really thought is going to be pretty mopey.
Right.
It moved.
Yeah. So, and it's not mopey, actually.
No, it has its moments.
Yeah, and it's really dazzlingly beautiful. I mean, that shade of red on Tilda Swinton is really a thing of beauty on its own, actually. It's really quite marvellous. And the image of her lying in that olive green bedspread, wearing that red suit, that red dress, that red pantsuit with, the man's suit next to her. It's just an extraordinary image, and there are many of them in the film, I think.
But that is really what it's about, the imagery and the tone, and the performance, because thinking about the dialogue, there isn't a moment of dialogue, a line of dialogue I can remember.
And that is the weakness in the film, because
Absolutely.
I mean, there are reasons why this monologue, which is turned into an opera, which has been remade millions of times, including several times by Almodóvar, There's a reason why it continues to live and resonate and continues to be performed and so on, right? And it's all, I mean, a play is all language. It's language and structure. So actually, it's a fault, I think, in this work that doesn't reverberate more.
That is where it falls down. Because I can only speak about the story really in generalities. It gets hard to get specific about what she's thinking, where she is, because you can't remember really anything that she says. It's not poetic or striking enough. That's an issue.
And I think it has to do with English. Yeah, with him not being in control of, you know, the language, the connotations, the reverberations. And it's an odd thing to talk about with Almodóvar, because usually when you talk about him, you're talking about the visual, right? You know, and, you know, the oral and the dialogue and so on is taken for granted. But actually, you know, now that you see him working in another language, you appreciate, you know, all that he brings to the Spanish language all the more.
Well, you certainly do.
I do.
I don't speak a word of Spanish.
All right, well, thank you very much for listening. We are Eavesdropping at the Movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, YouTube, and something else, Spotify. Our social media is Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening. The film is currently playing on Mubi, and we highly recommend that you see it. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.